these and scholars so that they can be responsive to communities and we can be a part of solving problems. And so that's what we're going to do as part of this three-part series. And today we open up with a focus on looking at reimagining our tax policy. Our other two series are also going to focus on issues around home ownership and around strengthening Black entrepreneurship. But we wanted to start today with this issue of looking at reimagining our tax policy because we know the economics of money and taxes is crucial to how we move forward as a community and to how we build wealth. This work really builds upon research that we had started on earlier this year here at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And if you haven't seen it, I urge you to read it. And it is our research paper entitled Forward Together, the Black Policy Playbook for an Equitable America. It is a project that we did jointly with the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, the nation's Black think tank, and it looks at those critical issues that are at the heart of the policy problems we are dealing with in the nation right now. But it not only looks at those issues, it gives you an analysis of those issues so that you understand the framing, but it also talks about solutions that we can all apply in our communities, in our schools, and wherever we have leadership roles and wherever we are active. And so this is the next step in using that research and again, in ensuring that individuals, scholars, community activists, grassroots activists, and leaders are empowered. So today you are going to hear from a group of experts who are going to talk to you about just how we can do that. And so I am encouraged by what I know we will do together, the work we will do, the conversation we will have, but most importantly, in what we will do after we leave this session and the following two sessions that we're also going to have. I believe that we are all collectively change makers and that we will make a difference in our communities. So I urge you to stay engaged and stay involved with us here at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and to take back what you are learning today into your own communities to be change makers right where you sit. So I would now like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Lauren Perlman, who is the Senior Research Manager of our Center for Policy Analysis and Research. She will serve as your moderator for the remainder of today's program, and she will introduce you to our expert panelists. And again, continue to do good work, continue to be empowered, and continue to work with us here at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Over to you, Lauren.
Hello and welcome. I am pleased to introduce the moderator for this panel, Jessica Fulton. Jessica Fulton is a thought leader and economic policy consultant with nearly 20 years of experience advocating for public policies to improve conditions for marginalized communities. An expert on issues at the intersection of race and economic policy, Jessica's work currently focuses on identifying and promoting policies to improve economic outcomes for Black households. Currently an economic policy consultant, Jessica previously helped to lead the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, America's Black think tank, as its vice president of policy and interim president. She has also made an impact on public policy at the federal, state, and local levels during roles at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and the Chicago Urban League. So please welcome our moderator, Jessica Fulton.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for the kind introduction. I am so excited for this conversation, basically because I'm excited to learn from the experts that CBCF has invited to talk about tax policy. These three experts are going to provide an overview of how our current tax code is used to widen racial economic gaps in wealth and income. And they're also going to provide us with insights into how policymakers, advocates, and really everyone in the audience can help shift circumstances so that the U.S. tax code helps Black households to build Black wealth, as it has for other communities for decades. So we're going to have a conversation with the panel, and then time permitting, we will have some audience Q&A. So get your questions ready and add them to the chat as we move them through the discussion. I want to have as much time as possible to have a discussion with the panelists. So I'm going to do some quick introductions, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. Professor Dorothy A. Brown is a nationally recognized scholar in the areas of race, wealth, and tax policy. She currently holds the Martin D. Ginsburg Chair in Taxation at Georgetown Law. She is the author of The Whiteness of Wealth: How the Tax System Impoverishes Black Americans and How We Can Fix It, which I personally would encourage the audience to pick up and read. And she also served on the Department of Treasury's Advisory Committee on Racial Equity. So, first, I want to welcome Professor Brown. Up next will be Jeremy Green. Jeremy has dedicated his life and career to the advancement of racial and economic justice. He began his career in the Columbia Heights and Shaw neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., organizing young people and tenants to fight back against the economic forces rapidly gentrifying their community. And he's continued to grow his impact at the national level in the federal government's premier policy agency, the Government Accountability Office, and at national nonprofits. He has become a national policy expert on the causes and policy solutions to close the racial wealth gap, and currently serves as the co-executive director at Liberation in a Generation. And then finally, we have Dr. Benga Ajilore. Dr. Ajilore is the chief economist at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. He most recently served as a senior advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary for Rural Development at the United States Department of Agriculture. Before that, he was a senior economist at the Center for American Progress and a tenured associate professor of economics at the University of Toledo. His expertise includes regional economic development, macroeconomic policy, and issues in diversity and inclusion. So as you all can see, we have really a stellar panel of experts who are going to help us understand how tax policy affects Black households and how we can use it to our benefit. So I want to start by grounding the conversation, and this question is really for all of the panelists. We know that the tax code is used to incentivize wealth building through certain approaches and populations, but we also know that it can extract wealth from others. So I want to start with the problems. From each of your perspectives, what is one of the biggest ways current tax policy undermines Black generational wealth? And where do you see the most urgent opportunities for reform? Let's start with Dorothy.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of my fellow panelists and those on the webinar. So when I think about what is the single biggest problem, it's that the tax system is a Black wealth killer and it's hidden in plain sight. That because we don't have data that makes it clear how every April 15th there is a transfer from from Black taxpayers to white taxpayers, it's really difficult to fix it. So to me, the problem starts with how it's hidden in plain sight, and most Americans don't understand that tax policy really is a civil rights issue.
That's a really important point, right? I think people forget that they don't check a box for race when they file their taxes. So we can't always see where the problems are. Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow because exactly what Dr. Brown said is where I think we all are gonna go. And where I'll land this start is the tax code plays two roles that really harm Black people. One, it is supposed to play a role of being a it is a program that funds programs, right? It is to raise the money to then fund the programs. But the way it's structured, it creates the scarcity that is used as justification to say, well, this is why we can't do this for Black people. Whatever it is, housing, healthcare, pick it. It'll say, well, we can't do this for Black people because there isn't enough money. And the tax code is the means to fund the things that would take care of that. The other thing it is a program in and of itself. It provides basically cash assistance to people, and really is what it becomes is a redistribution to the very wealthy, as Dr. Brown talked about. And because of a lot of the systemic things within our economy that hold Black people from gaining and building wealth, we are disadvantaged when we enter into that tax system. And if you think about it as a social program, it is a social program that is of the size of about $1.2 trillion a year. right? So when we talk about other social programs, we're talking in the billions, right? Maybe the ones of billions, the tens of billions, maybe the hundreds of billions, but the tax program is in the trillions. And research has shown that about 80% of the benefit of that 1.2 trillion goes to white households. And so when we think about what to do, there really isn't a single thing. We need a transformation of the tax code. Like that, when we are talking about a disparity of that size and dollars of that size, we're talking transformation. We are not talking about tweaking at the edges to try and make it a little bit better.
That's a really great point. Benga?
Thank you, and love following up on the two great points by Dr. Brown and Jeremy. I see two things. One is that we don't tax wealth, we tax income. And so we know about the racial wealth gap, and so white people have greater wealth than Black people. And so when you don't tax wealth, that's a whole like pot of money that can't be used to, fund social programs. And the other thing is, I think if we get it, we're gonna get into this later, but tax enforcement, right? People have to pay their taxes and they don't do that, then the IRS comes to enforce it. But when they don't have a budget to do that, who are they enforcing it on? They enforce it on earned income tax credit. And I know we'll get to that later, but that's two ways that impacts Black households.
You just mentioned this, Benga, and I want to start jumping into a few specifics on how inequities show up in the tax code. So one is with these working class tax credits, like the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. So we know that those can be really life-changing for families and really make a difference for households who have workers whose wages aren't high enough to help them make ends meet, right? Their employers aren't paying them enough. Um, but we also know that Black households are disproportionately excluded from receiving full benefits of certain tax credits, which is, I think, a little bit less understood. So I think I want to ask you all to kind of explain that. And then I'm curious about what kinds of reforms to these kinds of tax credits would most directly help close racial economic gaps for children and families. Like, is there a way that we can make reforms to tax credits on that in that part of the income ladder to help Black households bring in more money and even maybe put them on a path to wealth building? Maybe Benga, you can.
Yeah, I'll start real briefly. The biggest thing is refundability, right? So what happens is that you have these tax credits, but if you don't pay taxes, then you don't get access to that. Now, if you have refundability, which means that, whatever the full amount of the tax credit is, you get some of that money back as a refund. And what happened and the thing is that's really helpful for low-income households and low-income families, because then if you don't make enough money, you can still get benefits from that. But when it's not refundable, then it limits how much you're able to get back. And so we saw this during the pandemic when the child tax credit was expanded and made fully refundable. And so a lot of people were able to make money. And we saw the impact on child poverty. There's estimates from like a third to a half that reduced it. And so like this is not theoretical. This is not, we assume we saw it. It happened and then it expired. And then we look into one big beautiful bill. They said, oh, well, we boosted the amount of the child tax credit from 2,000 to 2,200, but it wasn't made refundable. So who gets the benefit? People who make more income. And so, just simply put, making tax credits refundable is the best way to help out.
I think that's a really great point because it's almost like we have folks who are earning the least, who are left out of claiming the credits. One of the other places that we know that there are some inequities, and this is like a very specific to wealth building, is retirement, right? So we know that Black workers are much less likely than white workers in particular to have access to the like tax advantages and savings benefits of having retirement plans at their workplace, right? And Black people tend to rely more heavily on Social Security. Could you all talk a little bit about why that creates inequities through the tax code? And then, what are some reforms around retirement-focused tax policy, whether it's around savings incentives or employer benefits or Social Security itself, to help Black workers age with dignity?
So I could jump in, Jessica. So part of why we see this disparity with respect to who is eligible for employer-provided retirement accounts is occupational segregation. That there are jobs that are disproportionately held by Black Americans and jobs that are disproportionately held by white Americans. And it will be a surprise to no one listening that the jobs that are disproportionately held by Black Americans are the ones least likely to have employer-provided health and retirement benefits because health insurance helps us not deplete our wealth. Retirement accounts help us build our wealth for retirement. So, Black Americans are least likely to work in those jobs that have access to those two items. But there's a further problem. Because Black Americans are often, many of us are often the first in our household, the first in a generation to go to college and may be making six figures, we have extended family, we have parents, we have cousins, we have siblings that our parents were the victims of Jim Crow and weren't able to save. So we have to support our parents. We have to support our siblings who haven't been as fortunate as us. So even those of us who have jobs that come with retirement accounts are more likely to make a withdrawal from those retirement accounts, leaving less in it to invest. So, one of the solutions that I talk about in my book, The Whiteness of Wealth, is about the fact that many Black college graduates are supporting more parents and siblings. Their money is going up. Their money is going up to help support their parents. Whereas white college graduates, money comes down. Their parents and grandparents are giving them money, and that's tax-free money. So one of the things I talk about in my book is wouldn't it be great if Black taxpayers who are subsidizing siblings and parents because of our Jim Crow policies got a tax break. There's nothing like that in the code now, but wouldn't it be great if there was a tax break to acknowledge the fact that Black dollars have to stretch further than our white peers?
That I see there's a lot of energy in the chat around that, and a lot of I think we all can relate to exactly what you said about just trying to help our families make ends meet, right? Benga, you brought this up a little bit, and I want to turn to tax enforcement because I think this is an under um, recognized area in tax policy, or like people just don't think about it often enough. But even though, we mentioned the IRS does not have data on the race of its taxpayers, we see some pretty awful trends in how the tax code is enforced. Black taxpayers are audited at disproportionately higher rates than white taxpayers. And I know there's also research that suggests that more disparities may exist elsewhere in the enforcement system, like in tax court, for example. So I'm curious how we should rethink IRS enforcement to make sure that there's fairness in and equity in tax administration.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. And this is another example where we've seen what actual good policy does, right? So there was this ProPublica study about enforcement on the earned income tax credit, and I think it was like some county in Mississippi had like the highest audit rate. And the reason why, and this is kind of goes to the structural nature of our tax code, is that this doesn't have to be people who are racist at the IRS. It's they have very little money to stretch for enforcement. So what's the easiest way to do enforcement? Where you just send a letter off to someone about the earned income tax credit, right? You said, oh, well, we think you took too much money back. And so you don't actually have to put a lot of effort into it. So it's just easier. It's a low hanging fruit. Now, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was $80 billion that was added to the IRS budget. About half of that went to enforcement. And so now you think about who can you enforce on taxes, and you put money to, let's say, corporate fraud. You look at high income fraud and making people pay their taxes. That costs money. You need staff, you need people, you need resources. We got those resources, and then we saw the evidence of that. And so there's a stat. By fall of 2024, the Biden administration recovered 172 million from 21,000 wealthy households that had not filed tax returns since 2017. So it's like you put money to enforcement, that's $172 million of our money that we get back, that to Jeremy's point, that goes into other programs that we could pay for, investment in communities, right? So we do that. But then what have we seen since? Cutting the funding of IRS, cutting the staff of IRS, ripping IRS agents. And so, again, this is not theoretical. We've seen it. We put the money in, we put in enforcement, and we see the return. There's also stat that if you audit the top 10%, every dollar spent on tax enforcement returns $12. If you look at the top 0.1%, every dollar returns $26. So like this is actually, so we hear people talk about debt and deficit. Again, this is actually money that we could bring in that could help with fiscal sustainability. So this is why it's so important and why we should be talking about this and looking at the evidence that we put money in enforcement. This is the return that we get.
And can I follow up on that? So uh, everything Benga said is absolutely right. There was more recent research out of Stanford that showed, well, they actually got through the IRS. Uh, access to tax return data with respect to audits. And what the study showed was Black earned income tax credit filers were 3 to 5 times more likely to be audited than non-Black earned income tax credit filers. What people often said in response to the ProPublica research was, oh, that's just because earned income tax credit folks are audited more than anybody else. And what the Stanford research showed was, no, we compare Black EIT claimants with non-Black EITC claimants, and 3 to 5 times more likely Black people are targeted. How is this? Because the IRS use algorithms. Shock! Algorithmic bias, right? There's really no surprise that algorithms are structurally, right? Um, uh, could structurally be used to disadvantage Black Americans. And what has gained less attention from that Stanford research is once you move outside of the earned income tax credit to everybody else, there's still a differentiation. Black taxpayers outside of the earned income tax credit world are more likely to be audited than their white peers. So we saw an improvement in the Biden administration when Commissioner Werfel was the IRS commissioner. The Stanford study results were replicated by the IRS, and Commissioner Werfel took responsibility and did a lot to change things, just with the statistic that Benga said. Rich people got audited. So when we think about the IRS, I want us to think about them as tax police. And we know that in America, policing has a racially disparate impact. You see, Black Americans are more likely to be targeted by the police, and white Americans are more likely to be given a free pass. The exact same thing happens with the IRS, who I refer to as the tax police.
Jessica, if I could weigh in on this to just add a little more from the taxpayer side of it, it is so just take the EITC, which is where a lot of this audit activity is coming from. It is one of the most complicated tax credits to file for. And it's complicated, particularly for Black people, because it's structured with like a sitcom family idea of what a family structure looks like. It's like 2 parents, 2 kids, here's how you file, boom. And if you look like that, it might not be that complicated if that's your household. But if you have multiple caregivers for children, you know, 2 parents, a grandparent, a another relative, right? All of that's allowed within the earned income tax credit, but it has these complicated formulas around how much time you have to be that person's childhood, as if people are punching a clock on caregiving, right? And you have to calculate all that at tax time, and then you have to say, okay, well then who gets to claim this credit? Because only one person can claim the credit. So that it doesn't take into account the ways in which Black people arrange care. And it is, even though it has earned income in the title, caring for children is a big part of the tax credit. The other thing that disadvantages folks, which I think a lot of mistakes come from, is it doesn't recognize certain types of earned income, like money earned through a work release program. Well, if you don't know that, you're just going to put your income, right? You earn income. It's money you earn. You might put that in there. Now, so it's all the targeting stuff that Benga and Dr. Brown talked about, but then also people make legitimate mistakes because it's complicated as hell, and it doesn't reflect the lives that Black people live.
These are all really great points, and I appreciate the idea of thinking about the IRS as tax police. Like I think that helps us situate kind of what their role is in these processes. Uh, Benga, so as an economist, you have highlighted the importance of structural reforms and opportunities to go beyond kind of surface level fixes. What evidence do you think makes the strongest case for reimagining the tax code to advance racial equity?
Thank you for that question. And I'm going back to the point about we don't tax wealth. And
Mm.
so this was an article in Forbes that says the 400 richest people in the US are worth a record $6.6 trillion after getting 1.2 trillion richer over the past year amid the surging stock markets and AI. And none of that's going to get taxed because we don't tax unrealized gains. And so you think about if you tax that, say like even at like 0.5%, what revenue we able to generate from that. And while people say, well, it's unrealized gain, so it's not their income, they use that unrealized gain to like build their wealth. You know, they do stuff on margin and loans and things like that based off of that. So they're able to gain money off of that. We should be able to tax that. And so one of the best ways to be able to do that is to basically find ways of taxing that wealth so that we're able to make things more fair.
Could you explain just quickly the difference between income and wealth? Because I think people get a little bit tripped up there.
Yeah.
It's important to make it clear.
Yeah. And, you know, my panelists also feel free to clarify that too. So with well, income is what you earn from your job. So like you get a paycheck, you get a salary, you work, your wages. Wealth is kind of think of it like a stock, right? So like if you get an inheritance, so that's also a big thing that we probably should get into at some point. But if you get an inheritance of like your parents pass away and you get $1 million, that's wealth. We talk about Social Security, right? We talk about retirement savings, like that's wealth, like a base of money that you're able to, like when you need to buy a house and you need a down payment, you people who have wealth are more likely to be able to afford a down payment. If your income, it's harder to do that, right? So income's the money that you earn on a daily basis. Wealth is a stock of money that you have just sitting there.
And if I could add on to that, think about, as Benga said, you go to work, that's income, that's wages. But think about you have some ABC stock, right? Stock in a company ABC, you buy it at 10, it's now worth 100. But if you haven't sold it, that $90 gain is wealth that isn't taxed. So we basically, our tax laws say, unless you sell or otherwise dispose of it, you don't have income. So I've got property that's worth 100 that I pay 10 for, but that difference is an income. But in terms of I get $100 of wages, that's income.
And then the other important piece being that we tax like the gains. If we do tax them,
Thank you. Yes. So our wages can be taxed as high as 37%, but the maximum rate on income from stock is 20%. And what you see with respect to those on the Forbes list is, and again, ProPublica did research on this, is those at the highest income Americans, the wealthiest Americans, pay tax rates significantly lower than 37%, significantly lower than 20%. So even though their income comes from stock and they're not going to pay anything more than 20%, often they pay even less because of other machinations they engage in every April 15th.
That's a great point. That's sort of the I remember when Warren Buffett used to say like his tax rate was lower than his secretary's, right? So that's kind of the idea there. Jeremy, let's bring you in here. At Liberation in a Generation, you focus on dismantling systems that perpetuate economic exclusion. How does tax policy fit into the broader fight for economic liberation?
Yeah. Um, I mean, one, it is it has been running along the same track, or it's been on the same train as all of what we would call the oppression economy that has created the racial wealth gap and economic disparity amongst blacks and whites. So it is a part of that train that's been running. There's a car in that train. And one of the ways, and I'll continue on the conversation that we were having around stock ownership. So if you think of stock ownership, right, it is ownership of a company that is operating in the world, right? And the way that our economic system is structured is that so those CEOs or those boards of directors of those companies, their job is to create the largest return on investment for those stockholders, right? That is what their job is. That means that they cut wages. That means that they cut medical benefits. That means they cut retirement benefits. They cut on working conditions and put people in dangerous working conditions. Like all of the awful things that we know that corporations do is largely done in the name of returning investments for their stockholders. So it also creates, and it was mentioned, large capital gains for those people that own that stock. So they not only get the capital gain from all of that activity, they also get the tax benefit. So the tax code incentivizes this type of activity, the lowering of wages, the cutting of medical benefits, all of the things we talk, it incentivizes corporations to do that so that they can make returns for their stockholders. Now, who are those wage earners in a lot of these companies? It's Black people that are having their wages cut, having their medical, their health care cut, having their retirement benefits cut, or not even getting them at all, working in dangerous working conditions. So these things interact and work with one another. The other thing so then who gains from that, right? Dorothy and Ranga talked about those wealthy taxpayers. One other group that gains from that is foreign investors. Almost 40% of the benefits of corporate taxes go to people that don't even live in the United States. They're foreign investors. Now, I'm not saying that to be like, say that nothing in the world matters except the United States. That's not what I'm saying. But when people get on their high horse about who should benefit from programs, the tax policy, tax system being one of them, we should take care of the people. And then if people say we can't take care of Black folks, then and 40% is going out to foreign investors, there's a disconnect there that I can't quite reconcile.
So we have to get to what are we going to do about it, because we've highlighted and not all of the problems, but a lot of the problems with the tax code. I'm going to turn to Dorothy. You've throughout your career, you've highlighted how racial biases are embedded in the tax code. What changes would most effectively address those structural inequities and make sure that the tax system works for rather than against Black households?
So I'm going to start fairly radical, and then I'm going to move to perhaps less radical. So when I finished The Whiteness of Wealth and saw writing The Whiteness of Wealth and saw the ways that our tax system disadvantages marriage the way Black people do it, disadvantaged home ownership the way Black people did it, disadvantaged going to college the way Black people did it, disadvantaged work the way Black people did it, and disadvantaged building wealth the way Black people did it, I realized that there really was only one thing that was going to fix the racial wealth gap, and it wasn't tinkering with tax policy, it was reparations. So the book that I wrote that's coming out on January 20th, Getting to Reparations, talks about that. Okay, so that's the radical proposal. If we want to just stick to our tax system, then one of the things I recommend is that we think about having a living allowance, that any worker who cannot make ends meet. And this goes beyond the earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit is peanuts compared to what a living wage that would empower American workers to take care of their families, to not have food insecurity, to be able to pay for housing, to be able to pay for just basic necessities. That if we had a living wage allowance that would make up the difference, and it would be tied to geography, right? The earned income tax credit is fixed based on the number of children in your home. The cost of living in a high cost city versus a low cost city is very different, but the earned income tax credit doesn't change no matter where you live. So, one of the proposals I talk about in the Whiteness of Wealth would be to create a living wage allowance that would do more than the earned income tax credit.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you going down the list of multiple different ways that the tax code currently disadvantages Black households. I want to open it up a little bit. I first ask Benga and Jeremy if they have sort of a big reform that they think of as an opportunity to reverse the structural inequities in the tax code. And then,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to say the word radical has a different meaning these days. I'm in DC, and right now the White House is being torn down. So what is radical is different. So I'm all for it. Um, I don't have a specific structural reform, but one of the things to think about is when we talk about taxes, there's a lot of misunderstanding about revenue generation. And so one of the things is that right now, I think the share of GDP that goes to revenue, or our revenue share of GDP is like 17%. And about 25 years ago, around 1999 or 2000, it was around 20%. And also at that time, we were running budget surpluses. Since then, and this is a research done by some other economists, is that we've had a couple major tax cuts. We've had a couple generational recessions. We've had wars. And so those things have lowered that share of GDP to revenue just down to 17%. And what if you look at the kind of trajectory, you see that every time it starts to creep up, we get some sort of tax cut proposal that brings it back down again. And so just kind of framing what the role of government is and what we do. And this goes back to Jeremy's earlier point about that these are all social programs. And so if we start thinking about the role of government as investing in communities, we have partially like a safety net to help people out, but we also do stuff to help communities prosper. And we have to pay for that. And so if we just think about our share of revenue from GDP should be like 20% or 21% or things like that. And just think about that way, and that money goes to investing in everyone, then that's, the kind of thing to frame then our policies that we want to do. That we just say that the role of government is just to help people, one, provide a floor, but then also help, boost people back up. And so if we just frame everything around that, then I think that's a way to be able to make an argument for closing wealth gaps, for investing in, communities and things like that.
Jeremy?
Yeah, well, I love radical. I even like a little less radical. I like both those proposals. I like that. I'm gonna go into process a little bit because what I think is the biggest, I think it needs transformation. I think the tax code needs transformation. And the only way you get that is through Black folks coming together across all of our differences as well, class differences, educational differences, regional differences. It's us coming together to really push for a transformation of it. And I'll say we have a late start in this area. I think the three of us could all, I think, attest to, like, we've been doing this a long time, and we've often been the one Black person in the room in these tax policy discussions. So I think there's a lot of work, one, to really make this a core part of Black academia, like Black academic thought, so that there's more Dorothy Browns bringing ideas like the ones she just mentioned to the kind of public discourse around this. Also, and one thing we're working on at Liberation Generation is how do we bring this into kind of the Black liberation fight that's happening on the streets across the country, whether it's around housing justice, whether it's around healthcare, whether it's around policing, whether it's around worker justice. There's a lot of Black-led organizing work happening in those domains that tax policy is a core part of them winning the things that they're asking for in those areas. And I think bringing tax policy and tax justice into those conversations is the way that we're going to move towards that transformation.
And I'd like to pick up there if it's okay, Jessica. So part of me, I couldn't agree more. Part of me thinks it's partly a messaging issue. The other part of me is we need to think about tax policy as a civil rights issue. And when I think about messaging, I read something once that I'm going to repeat that stuck with me ever since, that Black Americans pay first class taxes for second class citizenship. And we never really think about that. I mean, Black Americans were brought into the tax system along with the majority of white Americans during World War II. And if we think about World War II, when the government legally discriminated against Black people, the government legally denied loans, FHA insured loans to Black people, the government legally denied benefits to returning Black veterans, but Black taxpayers were paying to support a VA discriminating against us. Black taxpayers are paying to support a housing administration discriminating against us. So we really have paid for our government to treat us like second class citizens, and we needed to spend a little more time talking about that.
Okay, so what are we gonna do? Like, what is one concrete step that folks can take, whether it be policymakers, advocates, or audience makers, can take to advance racial equity in tax policy, in the tax code or in tax enforcement? Like, what should folks do?
I can start there. I'm gonna really talk to, hopefully, I hope we have some like organizers on this call. If not, I have some work to do, and I'll continue to do it. But I mean, we have to ask the questions. We should start conversations around um, advocacy campaigns with, where's the money going to come from? Like, where is the money coming from? And that quickly takes us to a place of tax or revenue policy. And it isn't just at the federal level. We talked a lot about federal taxes here. There's state taxes that are like awfully regressive, particularly in states where Black folks live. There are local tax policy that is incredibly regressive. So basically whole cities that are run on fines and fees that target Black folks. So if we're asking where's the money coming from, it's that first class taxes and second class services, is that we have to bring that into our policy. So we can make the demand for more affordable housing, which we should do. And we should also say, and here, government, what you should do to pay for that. And we're going to hold you accountable to both. And so folks that are involved in those types of campaigns, I would say, let's start having that conversation. And there are folks like us, the Liberation Generation, Color Change, other groups that are focused on Black liberation that can help with that.
I'm going to start turning to Dorothy.
I would just pick up, and obviously people who are here, they hear taxes and they don't run away. But the one thing I would ask the typical Black American is to not do what every ounce of their being tells them to do when they hear the three-letter word tax. They want to run away. I understand it. I teach this stuff. My students want to run away. Do not, because this is a civil rights issue. So the one thing everybody can do is, when they hear tax policy or when they hear something about taxes, do not change the channel. Do not go to another screen. Sit there, absorb it, and think about the racial implications. So part of our job is helping people understand, if you don't pay attention, your pocket is still getting picked. If you pay attention, we can stop folks from picking your pocket.
Can I add one more quick thing? I think the other important thing is that we actually have an opportunity to advocate because of the one big beautiful bill. Like, there was tax policy and there was spending policy in that. And the spending policy, all the cuts to Medicaid, all the cuts to SNAP, the expiration of the Affordable Care Act, it was all to pay for the extreme tax cuts for rich. And so at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, we have research on that. We have like toolkits that kind of show like the comparison. Like the thing that I always think about is it with the Affordable Care Act tax credits expiring, we had all kinds of tax credits that were going to expire, and everyone complaining that, well, we can't let it expire. We have to, that's going to be a tax raise. But then this one, so like the estate tax, that was going to expire, but then they extended it and they expanded it. But then health tax credits, they're going to let expire at the end of the year. And so like using that as a springboard for advocacy is something that we do right now.
I'm going to ask if anyone wants to explain the estate tax piece. And we also have a question from the audience that asks about how the One Big Beautiful Bill Act impacts tax policy and if there are elements in the bill that Black Americans can use to build wealth.
So I'll start with the estate tax. So our federal income tax system says when I receive a gift or I inherit property, I receive that tax-free. I get to exclude it from my income. But we have this other system, estate and gift taxation system, where everyone who is born gets a certain amount of a credit, which is effective, a certain amount of money they can give away during their life or leave when they die, and nobody has to pay taxes on it. They don't have to pay estate and gift taxes. I think we're up to $15 million a person at this point, which means like, I don't know, 500 people are subject to the estate and gift tax because 15 million is just 15 million plus the loopholes that the rich have covers pretty much everybody. Uh, in terms of what the big beautiful bill, which I never referred to it that way, does to help. One thing that I thought the 2017 Tax Act did to help a lot of people was increase the standard deduction. The standard deduction was a fixed amount for years and years, and the standard deduction is for people who don't itemize. They don't separately count their mortgage interest and state and local taxes because they either don't have enough of it, i.e., they rent, or they just don't have enough. They may have paid off their house. So the standard deduction allows you to pay less taxes. And the expansion of the standard deduction after the 2017 Act moved, before it, two-thirds of Americans used the standard deduction. After the 2017 Act, that went up to about 90%. So most Americans do not benefit from these special tax breaks, which to me means there's an opportunity to repeal some of them. But I don't say there's much in that 2025 bill that will help Black Americans build wealth.
Mm, Thanks, Dorothy. We have another question, and I'm going to add to it. But so they said Florida has a proposal to eliminate property taxes. What impact would that have on Black communities, specifically regarding public education, first responders, hospitals, etc.? I'm going to amend that to say, like, there are also lots of states that think about eliminating income taxes, right? So thinking about those two ways to um, decrease revenues. Could you all speak to that?
Yeah, I can jump on this. I think state taxes are a huge frontier that is under focused on nationally and particularly by Black folks. And the trap there is real. So property has largely been held away from Black people. So there has been the way in which states are able to raise revenue is largely through property. Property and income is pretty much how states raise income, raise taxes. There are certain states that don't even have an income tax, right? And now they're moving to get rid of property tax. Texas is also a state that's moving in a similar direction of trying to almost get rid of property tax while they also don't even have an income tax. So what that means, so that now there are probably a lot of wealthy Black folks that own property that this sounds good. It sounds good for them. It would sound good for someone who is a property owner, but the vast majority of Black folks in a state like Florida do not own property. That means that the revenue that is usually gained by the property tax is not going to be there, and then it creates the other justification of scarcity, in which why we can't do the things that Black folks in Florida need: healthcare, housing. You can go down the list of things. And so this just becomes another way in which you create scarcity, in which, and so then what happens after that in Florida? Well, they still have to provide all these services. So what do they start doing? They start contracting these services out. They start privatizing things that were public, like education, because they no longer have the money to pay for them. And this will harm Black people more than any gains that would happen because of the elimination of property tax. And another thing that happens here, and Dr. Brown and folks are much know a lot more about this than me, but what I know is what is paid through property taxes around the value of the house. Black folks don't have a lot. There are a lot of people whose value is underwater. And so there's really no gain here anyway. And then you're also, so there's this does not work for Black communities, in my view.
We have a question that feels a little bit related, because I sort of think of proposals to decrease revenues as kind of a like they sound good, but they're really not in the long run. And I think, Jeremy, you just um, showed a very clear line to why. Could somebody speak to wealth building strategies for everyday people and how to tell the valid ones from scams? You sort of think of the ads that you might hear on the radio of like what you should do, like tax ways that you should file your taxes, or like people you should call that could get your taxes lowered, that kind of thing.
I can jump in that. And I'm gonna say this way: there are no hacks. There are no hacks. There's no like way of avoiding paying taxes. If the way the system is structured, the way it says that you should pay taxes. So if someone's coming with a scheme that they know something that no one else knows about the tax code, it's a scam. Because there are no hacks. There is no way around it. The system is built the way it is, and it's structured the way it is. And there's a lot of people out there selling that. Um, the other thing is, and that I'll say is, the economy is structured for Black people to not build wealth. That is a systemic problem. Are some people, and the people that are able to overcome that have not done it through a scheme, right? They've been privileged enough to participate in a system built for white folks, even though they're Black, right? You can think of all the celebrities, all the very wealthy people, Robert Smith, they have participated in the system that is built for white people, and they've been able to do it as a Black person. There is no like off-ramp way for Black people to build wealth. And if someone's offering that, it is a scheme. Bitcoin, whatever, gold, whatever they're bringing to you, it is a scheme. And there's a lot. So to me, the education for the community for Black folks shouldn't be around like what's the scheme or hack. It's that there's only one path towards wealth, and we are blocked from it. And a systemic change is what's going to change it for the vast majority of Black folks. So that's mine.
I would like to plus one that because Black people who have done well, they've hit roadblocks, but they've been able to not get totally derailed. Because again, the system is structured not for us not to do it. And so when you see people have done well, it's like, oh, I just worked hard. It's like, I mean, a lot of people work hard, right? But someone worked hard, got lucky, or had something that didn't fully derail them and then made it. And so just understanding that and appreciating that, that's important.
I definitely want to say like plus 1,000 to that, right? I call it Black exceptionalism. That when you see a Black person who's built well, there are a number of miracles involved because lots of people are hard workers. Like in my family, Our luck was my father, the plumber, who was denied a union job because in New York, Black folks weren't allowed in the plumbers union. But he had a white boss in the private sector, and his white boss's mother decided my parents should own a home and loan them the money for the down payment on their home. That was sheer luck. So the majority of Black Americans are not homeowners, but my parents were. And as a result of that, we actually wound up with wealth. But that's like luck. It isn't because my parents were more deserving than your parents, or my parents are more deserving than anybody else's parents. My father got lucky with respect to his boss. And I think some people in the Black community get wealth and think, therefore, everybody else should be able to do it because they got it because of hard work. They do not examine the luck in it. And we as a society tend to find a Black person who's gotten wealth and said, therefore, if they can do it, everybody else can do it. And they ignore the structural problem. So I think there's a danger in thinking, I did it and here's how everybody else can do it. Be, because we tend to downplay the role of luck in our good fortune.
So I've got, I think about two more really quick questions before we close out. The first is, how will AI affect wealth building in Black communities?
I'll take that one. We don't know the answer to that because we don't know if AI is even going to work. And so if we think about and and there's a lot of possible good things that could come out of AI. There's a lot of scams. I mean, you just see all those like videos of MLK like doing DJing, like just terrible things with AI, right? But the problem with AI is that that thing hasn't hit the economy yet the way it's going to. And the example here is we think about the internet in the 90s, that everyone's like, this is going to revolutionize things. And there was this big run up in, 2000, 2001, and then everything collapsed. Like there was a dot-com bust. And a lot of people lost money that way. Now, the internet still is it's actually revolutionized things. I mean, we're able to do this panel, virtually, right? We have 200 people here, so it has hit. So we can't look at AI as a way of, oh, this is going to be the thing. It's, you look at it, you follow it, but we can't say for certain how it's going to impact wealth. We know how it's impacting wealth for certain groups. There's like, I think it was like 5 companies, and they're all giving each other money and boosting the stock market. But generally throughout the economy, we still don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, can I quick hop in here is to talk about the infrastructure of AI because that's the thing that I'm really concerned about. And AI is going to require a lot of land, a lot of energy, and a lot of water in order just to function so that you could do stupid pictures of MLK DJing. And what that's going to mean, though, what that means for Black communities, although there isn't a lot of data on it, I am very concerned because historically, when infrastructure growth has been required to do some new thing for the economy, it is done at our expense. It is done to take property away from us. Our energy prices could go up. The access to water, which many Black communities have limited access to begin with, is going to be restricted. So my concern about wealth for Black folks is that a lot of it, in addition to much of what Benga said, is the infrastructure impact of AI on Black communities.
I have I saw a question in the chat, and I want to make this my last question. And it's basically asking about whether the redistribution in the tax code is about class-based transfers rather than race-based transfers. Like, is it from the working and middle class to the rich? Basically, is it race or is it class? And Dorothy, I know you have an answer for that, so I wanted to point that to you.
I love this question. I've been writing about race and tax scholarship for over 25 years, and this is almost the first question I always get. And what my scholarship does is it looks at race and class, and what I have seen over now 30 years of doing this is it's race. That across class lines, Black Americans are disadvantaged in the tax law compared to their white peers. So I'm going to give you a famous example. President Obama had tax returns that he published every year he was president. And because I write about race and tax, used to get very excited every April 15th because he was a Black family's taxes that I would never have access to other than my own parents. And what I saw with President Obama is what you see with Black wealthy people generally. Their income almost exclusively comes from wages, which means they are taxed at much higher rates than their white peers at the same income level that have more of their income from stock. So my calculation for the Obamas is their tax rate was 10 percentage points higher. He's making over $1 million because of his book royalty. 10 percentage points higher because his income came from wages and not from stock. So the race and class question always gets asked. And when I've looked at this question across these different uh, areas, marriage, home ownership, job, Black Americans are disadvantaged compared to their white peers in our tax system across income levels.
I obviously this is something that I could listen to you all talk about for another few hours, but I'm really happy to have been able to be a part of this discussion. So thank you all for just sharing your insights and your knowledge and your expertise with me and with the other folks on the webinar. We're going to close this out. We're going to welcome Dr. Jonathan Cox to join us to offer some closing remarks. But I think, um, overall, I'm just grateful for you all showing us both the challenges with the current system and how we can move forward. So, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it. And thank you all as well for this wonderful discussion. So good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Jonathan Cox. I'm the Vice President for our Center for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Now, in closing out this first session of the Virtual Economic Advancement Summit series, I wanted to offer again just a huge thank you to each of our speakers for their powerful words this morning. Each of you have provided thoughtful, timely commentary on the ways in which we can reimagine and reshape tax policies to help expand economic opportunity for Black communities and facilitate the building of generational wealth for our people. I also offer my sincere gratitude to everyone who joined us today for this webinar. Now, it is our goal and privilege at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation to provide relevant, timely information on issues that are important to Black communities and to use this work to help push positive policy changes that better the lives of Black people in America and everyone else as a result. And I hope that you have all found today's panel to be engaging and informative. Now, as we move forward together, the discussions and ideas generated through this summit must translate into action. So let each of us commit to building on the momentum we have generated here, for it is only through our sustained advocacy, strategic partnerships, and unwavering dedication that we will overcome the challenges that we are all facing. Now, before I let you all go this morning, I did want to share just a few quick items with you. First, please be sure to check out all of the resources that were made available in the event chat throughout the session today. Chief among them, the Black Policy Playbook that our President and CEO, Nicole Austin Hillary, mentioned. In this playbook, you'll find not only more information that is related to Black economic advancement, but also policy recommendations along 6 additional policy areas, including education, voting rights, technology, and more. Now, the Center for Policy Analysis and Research team cultivated the resources that they've been sharing to be helpful, informative tools that advanced Black communities. And you can see the rest of our work, research and policy, by visiting our website at www.cbcfinc.org. Second, please make sure you join us for the second and third webinars in this series. Next Tuesday, October 28th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll focus on unlocking the promise of home ownership as a tool for building intergenerational wealth for Black people with our webinar, A Place to Prosper, Expanding Black Homeownership and Housing Equity. Now, we'll end this series on October 30th, next Thursday, at 10 a.m. with our session entitled Financing Black Futures, Investing in Black Businesses to Grow America's Future. Now, this webinar will explore policy solutions that help ensure that Black entrepreneurs have equitable access to capital, financial innovations, and developmental support which are all really essential in advancing Black business ownership, closing the wealth gap, and growing the U.S. economy for the betterment of all Americans. Finally, make sure you stay in the know about what's going on at CBCF by following us on X and Instagram, connecting with us on LinkedIn, and liking us on Facebook. So again, thank you all for your time this morning. We appreciate it. And on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, I wish you all a great remainder of your day. Go forward in peace and purpose. Thank you.